In 1993, Keanu Reeves was unexpectedly pulled over late at night in Los Angeles, only to find himself held at gunpoint by a rogue police officer. What started as a terrifying encounter unraveled into a dark conspiracy with the officer jailed. Shortly after the incident, this shocking event became a pivotal moment in Reeves' life, revealing a deeper side of his resilience and humanity. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more inspiring stories. It was a cold November evening in 1993 and Keanu Reeves was driving his black Porsche 9911 through the dimly lit streets of Los Angeles. The city was quiet, blanketed by the weight of a clouded sky, as Reeves, just 29 at the time, returned home after dinner with close friends. Little did he know that this seemingly routine drive would change his life forever. Out of nowhere, red and blue lights erupted behind him. Surprised but calm, Keanu pulled over to the side of the road on Malin Drive, a stretch known for its winding curves and isolation at night. As he reached for his registration, he noticed the officer approaching unusually quickly. Before Keanu could speak, the officer drew his gun and pointed it directly at him, his voice cold and commanding. Get out of the car now, the officer barked. Keanu, visibly shaken but cooperative, slowly opened the door and stepped out with his hands raised. He could feel the tension in the air, the pulse of his heartbeat drowning out the sound of the occasional car passing in the distance. Sir, is there a problem? Keanu asked, his voice steady despite the fear tightening in his chest. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he gestured aggressively with the gun, ordering Keanu to kneel on the pavement. For a moment the world around him seemed to fade, and memories of his late father, who had left his family years ago, flashed before his eyes. That familiar sense of abandonment crept back in, but this time it was accompanied by something new, dread unbeknownst to Keanu. This officer had a history of misconduct, a complaint filed just weeks earlier by a young mother claimed that the officer had threatened her during a routine traffic stop, yet somehow he remained on duty, and tonight Keanu was his latest target. As the minutes dragged on, the officer began questioning him aggressively, accusing him of being under the influence. Keanu, who had barely touched a drink all night, maintained his innocence, his calm demeanor a testament to the quiet strength he was known for. I don't understand what's happening here, he said softly, his dark eyes locking onto the officers. Then, as if the universe intervened, a second patrol car arrived. A younger officer stepped out, immediately recognizing Keanu. Wait, isn't that the guy from Point Break? He whispered to his partner. The tension broke for a split second, but it was enough for the new officer to sense something was off. What's going on here, he demanded, his eyes darting between Keanu and the officer holding the gun. Keanu, still kneeling on the ground, finally exhaled. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice laced with a mix of fear and relief. The younger officer nodded and signaled for him to stand. What followed was a whirlwind investigation. The rogue officer history of abuse came to light, and within weeks he was not only stripped of his badge but also jailed for misconduct. The media caught wind of the story, painting Keanu as a victim of an unjust system, but Keanu never sought revenge or retribution. Instead, he used the experience to reflect on the fragility of life and the importance of staying grounded even in moments of chaos. What haunted him most, however, wasn't the gun or the officers' accusations. It was the thought of how quickly things could have escalated. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and he might not have lived to tell the tale. And yet, in typical Keanu fashion, he chose to move forward with quiet grace, his life forever altered by the events of that November night. But this story doesn't end there. It was only the beginning of a chapter in Keanu's life that revealed not just the cracks in the system but also the resilience of a man who had already endured so much. As the years went on, Keanu would come to see this moment as a turning point, a reminder that even in the darkest times there's always a way to rise above. And little did he know this encounter would lead to a connection that would forever change his path. The weeks after that harrowing night passed like a blur for Keanu Reeves. Though the rogue officer was quickly brought to justice, the emotional weight of the encounter lingered. Alone in his modest home nestled in the Hollywood Hills, Keanu found himself reflecting on the fragility of life. It wasn't just the moment when the gun had been pointed at him, but the deeper realization of how in an instant everything could be stripped away. He spent his nights gazing at the Los Angeles skyline, the city lights flickering like stars just out of reach. Keanu had always been introspective, a Man who kept his emotions bottled inside, but this experience had left an indelible mark though his fame continued to grow. He felt increasingly disconnected from the glittering world of Hollywood, the parties, the premieres. It all felt hollow. It was during one of those quiet nights that a letter arrived at his door. It was from a woman named Emma Walters, a nurse from San Diego. She had heard about the incident on the news and felt compelled to write to him. Her words were simple yet deeply moving. She shared her own story of surviving a traumatic event, a car accident that had left her bedridden for months, and how during her recovery she had found solace in watching his films. Your movies gave me hope when I didn't think I could keep going, she wrote. I just wanted to thank you for being a light in a dark time. Keanu, moved by her honesty, sat with the letter for hours. He rarely responded to fan mail, but something about Emma's words struck a chord that night. He wrote back a heartfelt note thanking her for her courage and sharing how her words had given him perspective during one of the most challenging periods of his life. He sent the letter never expecting a reply, but Emma did reply. What began as a simple exchange of letters quickly evolved into a connection neither of them had anticipated. They wrote to each other every week, sharing their thoughts, fears and dreams. Emma told Keanu about her childhood growing up by the beach, how the ocean had always been her refuge. Keanu in turn opened up about his struggles with loss, his father's abandonment, the death of his best friend River Phoenix, and the weight of being thrust into the spotlight at such a young age. Months passed and their correspondence deepened into something that felt both fragile and profound. Keanu, known for his guarded nature, found himself letting his walls down in a way he hadn't in years. Emma became a lifeline for him, a reminder that there was beauty and vulnerability, that even in the darkest moments human connection could offer solace. One evening as spring began to warm the California air, Keanu decided to visit Emma in San Diego. He didn't call ahead, fearing she might tell him not to come, and instead showed up at the small beachside cafe where she worked on weekends. When Emma saw him standing in the doorway, her breath caught. She had seen his face 1,000 times on movie posters and screens, but in that moment he was just Keanu, a man whose eyes carried the weight of everything they had shared. Hi, he said, his voice soft but steady. Emma, too stunned to speak, simply nodded. They sat by the window, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filling the silence between them, and though neither of them said much that night, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of ways. Their story didn't unfold like a Hollywood romance. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations of love. Instead, it was in the quiet moments, long walks along the beach, handwritten notes left on the kitchen counter, nights spent talking until dawn, that their bond grew stronger. Keanu, for the first time in years, felt a sense of peace, and Emma, who had spent so much of her life tending to others, finally found someone who saw her for who she truly was. But life, as Keanu had learned, is never without its twists. Just as their relationship began to blossom, an unexpected challenge arose, one that would test the strength of their connection and force them to confront the pain of their pasts. For Keanu, it was a reminder that love, like life, is rarely simple, but in Emma he had found something worth fighting for. And so their story continued, a journey of healing, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from finding someone who understands the depths of your soul. As the days turned into weeks, Keanu and Emma's bond deepened like two rivers, quietly merging into one. Their connection was effortless yet layered with complexity. Two people scarred by life, finding solace in each other's presence. Keanu, who had spent years silently carrying his grief, felt lighter when he was with her. Emma, who had learned to endure her pain alone, discovered a rare sense of safety in his quiet strength. But love, as they both knew, wasn't just about the good moments. It was about facing the storms together, and theirs was approaching faster than either of them could have imagined. One late evening, while sitting on the porch of Emma's small seaside home, Keanu noticed her rubbing her wrist absent-mindedly. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her whiz, but she always brushed it off with a soft smile and an excuse about an old injury acting up this time. Though he pressed Emma, he said gently, his voice filled with concern, "You've been doing that a lot lately. What's going on?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment she looked as though she might deflect again, but something about the way Keanu's eyes searched hers, so sincere, so patient, made her pause. "It's nothing really," she began, her voice trembling, "just residual pain from the accident. Some days are worse than others." Keanu reached for her hand, holding it delicately as if it might break under his touch. Emma, he said softly, you don't have to carry this alone, whatever it is, I'm here. Tears welled in her eyes and she finally let the walls she built crumble. I've been having these episodes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Numbness. Weakness. Sometimes I can't even hold a pen without it slipping from my fingers. I've been trying to ignore it, hoping it'll go away, but it's been getting worse. Keanu's chest tightened, he'd face lost before, gut-wrenching, soul-crushing loss, but the thought of Emma enduring this in silence made his heart ache in a way he hadn't felt before. Have you seen a doctor, he asked. Though he already knew the answer, she shook her head, guilt flickering in her expression. I didn't want to worry anyone. And honestly, I'm scared. Keanu, what if it's something serious? He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and the sound of the waves filled the silence between them. Whatever it is, we'll face it together, he whispered, his voice firm with quiet determination. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The next morning, Keanu drove Emma to a neurologist in Los Angeles, holding her hand tightly the entire way. The office was sterile and quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights adding to the tension as Emma underwent a series of tests. Keanu waited anxiously in the lobby, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Hours later, the doctor called them into his office. The look on his face was serious and Emma's grip on Keanu's hand tightened. Emma, the doctor began, his tone cautious but compassionate. Your symptoms are consistent with early onset multiple sclerosis. The words hung in the air like a weight neither of them could bear. Emma's breath hitched, and for a moment it felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. Keanu, though shaken, remained steady. He turned to her, his gaze unwavering. Get through this, he said firmly. You're not alone, Emma, you never will be. But the weeks that followed tested them both in ways they couldn't have anticipated. Emma, fiercely independent by nature, struggled to accept help even from Keanu. She hated feeling like a burden, and as her condition progressed, the simple tasks she had once taken for granted became battles she fought in silence. Keanu, for his part, was patient and attentive, but he worried constantly. He'd already lost so many people he loved. What if Emma was next? One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Emma broke down. I don't want you to feel trapped, she said through tears, her voice raw with pain. You didn't sign up for this, Keanu. I don't want to hold you back. Keanu knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you're not holding me back. You're giving me something I've never had before, a reason to fight, a reason to hope. Her tears fell harder, but this time they weren't just tears of sadness. For the first time in a long time she felt truly seen, truly loved. As the months passed, they adapted to their new reality. Keanu rearranged his schedule, prioritizing time with Emma over film shoots. They traveled together when her health allowed, seeking solace in the beauty of nature and in the quiet moments when the world felt too heavy. They leaned on each other, finding strength in the love they had built. Their story wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was real, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they would face whatever came next together, hand in hand, one step at a time. The days began to blend into each other as Keanu and Emma quietly learned to navigate the unknown. Their love wasn't just a spark anymore, it was a fire that burned steady even in the face of darkness. Emma's health challenges grew more demanding, and there were times when her body betrayed her so completely she couldn't even rise from bed. Yet even in those moments, Keanu remained by her side, steadfast and unshakable. One particular night, when the rain poured relentlessly against the windows of their small house in San Diego, Emma woke with tears streaming down her face. Keanu stirred, immediately sensing her distress. What's wrong, he asked, his voice low but urgent. She looked at him with eyes full of heartbreak, her voice trembling as she whispered, I had a dream. I was walking on the beach just like before the accident. I could feel the sand between my toes, the breeze in my hair. I was free, Keanu. I felt alive. And then I woke up and I couldn't even move my legs. Keanu didn't respond right away. Instead, he held her as she cried, his heart breaking with every sob. When she finally calmed, he kissed her forehead and said, Emma, you're still alive, you're still here, and even if you can't walk that beach right now, I'll carry you as far as you want to go. The next morning, Keanu surprised her. He had packed a small bag and carried her gently to the car, refusing to answer her questions about Where they were going hours later they arrived at a secluded beach along the Pacific coast, the sun setting in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Emma looked at him in confusion. Keanu, I can't even stand, she murmured, her voice laced with defeat. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I told you I'd carry you, and with that, he scooped her into his arms, walking slowly onto the sand. The ocean waves lapped at their feet and Emma rested her head against his chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt peace in that moment. The weight of her illness seemed to fade, replaced by the warmth of his unwavering love. But life, as it so often does, refused to let them linger in peace for long. One evening, just as Emma had begun to settle into her new normal, Keanu received a phone call that shook him to his core. It was about his sister Kim, who had been battling leukemia for years. The cancer had returned more aggressive than before. Keanu's world began to spiral between Emma's worsening condition and Kim's health crisis. He felt like he was being torn apart, yet he refused to let either of them see his fear. He split his time between Emma's side and the hospital, where Kim was undergoing treatment, his days a blur of hospital sleepless nights and quiet moments of desperation. Emma noticed the strain in his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the world. One evening as they sat together on the couch, she reached for his hand. Keanu, she said softly, you don't have to do this alone. Let me be there for you the way you've been there for me. He looked at her, his eyes filled with unshed tears. Emma, you're already fighting your own battle. I can't ask you to take on mine too. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips despite her exhaustion. You didn't ask, Keanu. I'm offering. That's what love is, isn't it? Carrying each other when the load gets too heavy. Her words struck him deeply, and for the first time in weeks he allowed himself to lean on her. Together they faced the storm, finding strength in each other's presence even as their worlds seemed to crumble around them. And then came the night that would change everything. Emma woke in the middle of the night to find Keanu sitting on the floor by her bed, his head in his hands. Keanu, she called softly, her voice barely audible. He looked up, his face etched with a pain she had never seen before. What is it? She asked, her heart pounding. I got a call, he said, his voice cracking. It's Kim, the doctors. They don't think she has much time left. Emma's heart shattered at the sight of him breaking down. She wanted nothing more than to wrap him in her arms and take his pain away, but her body betrayed her once again. Instead she reached for his hand, squeezing it with all the strength she could muster. We'll go to her, she said firmly, right now. And so they went, Emma insisting on being by his side despite her own struggles. When they arrived at the hospital, the room was quiet, the hum of machines filling the air. Kim, pale but smiling faintly, looked up as they entered. Keanu, she whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. You're here. He knelt by her bedside, taking her hand in his. I'm here, Kim, I'm always here. Emma watched from her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the bond between them. It reminded her of the fragility of life, the fleeting nature of the moments we often take for granted, and in that moment she made a silent promise to herself and to Keanu that she would fight with everything she had for as long as she could, so they could create memories like this together. But as the days turned into nights and the nights into weeks, the weight of their struggles grew heavier. Emma's condition continued to worsen, and Keanu found himself grappling with the unbearable thought of losing two of the people he loved most. Yet through it all he never faltered. He stood by Emma's side during her hardest days, and she in turn gave him the strength to face his sister's battle. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: their love was the kind that could endure anything, because no matter how dark the night became, they always managed to find each other's light. The hospital room felt impossibly quiet. Kim's breathing was shallow and her frailty struck Keanu in a way he wasn't prepared for. As he sat by her side, he held her hand, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. Kim looked up at him, her tired eyes brimming with both love and unspoken fears. You've always been the strong one, K, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Keanu smiled faint, though his heart ached. I learned it from you, Kim. You fought harder than anyone I've ever known. Behind him, Emma sat silently in her wheelchair, observing the tenderness between the siblings. She wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort, but she knew this moment wasn't hers to interrupt. Yet her presence alone seemed to fill the room with warmth, a quiet reassurance that they were all in this together. Over the following days, Keanu split himself between Emma and Kim, juggling hospital visits and Emma's care with a strength that seemed superhuman, but it wasn't without cost. His sleepless nights began to show, the bags under his eyes grew darker and his once steady demeanor started to waver. One evening Emma confronted him as he sat at the edge of their bed, his shoulders slumped and his head bowed. "Keanu," she began, her voice soft but firm, "you can't keep doing this, you're going to break." He looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with an exhaustion that words couldn't capture. "I can't stop, Emma. If I stop, I'm afraid I'll lose everything. I can't lose you. I can't lose Kim." Emma wheeled herself closer, reaching out to touch his hand. "You're not losing me," she said, her voice trembling, "and no matter what happens with Kim, you won't lose her either. She's a part of you, Keanu. She always will be." Her words struck a chord deep within him. And for the first time in weeks, Keanu allowed himself to cry, not the quiet, restrained tears he was used to shedding, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to pour out all the pain he had been holding inside. Emma held his hand tightly, her own tears falling as she whispered, "You don't have to carry this alone. Let me be your strength like you've been mine." The next morning they went to see Kim together. She was weaker than before, her voice barely above a whisper, but when she saw Emma and Keanu enter the room, a faint smile spread across her face. "You brought her," she murmured, her gaze softening as she looked at Emma. Emma smiled through her tears. "Of course, your family, Kim, and family stick together." As the days passed, they created what moments they could with Kim, telling stories, sharing quiet laughter, and simply being present. Keanu brought Emma's wheelchair as close as possible to Kim's bedside, and the two women found comfort in each other's company, bonding over their shared love for the man who had been their rock through it all. But even as they clung to these fleeting moments, the inevitable loomed over them like a shadow. One night as Keanu sat by Kim's bedside, her breathing grew shallow, her grip on his hand weaker. "Kay," she whispered, her voice barely audible, promise me you'll keep living. Don't let this stop you." Tears streamed down his face as he nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "I promise," he finally managed, his voice cracking. "I promise, Kim." She smiled faintly, her eyes closing as she whispered, "I love you, big brother." And just like that, she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Keanu sat frozen, his heart shattered, unable to comprehend the loss. Emma wheeled herself closer, her arms reaching out to him. He buried his face in her lap, his tears soaking her dress as she gently stroked his hair. "She loved you so much, Keanu," Emma murmured, her own voice breaking, "and she was so proud of you." In the weeks that followed, the grief was suffocating. Keanu threw himself into caring for Emma, trying to distract himself from the aching void Kim had left behind. But Emma saw through him. She knew he was running, burying his pain in an attempt to protect her. One night as they sat together on the porch of their home, Emma broke the silence. "Keanu, you have to let yourself grieve. You can't carry all of this alone." He looked at her, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "I don't know how, Emma. I don't know how to let go." She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "You don't have to let go. You carry her with you just like you carry all the people you've loved and lost, but you have to let yourself feel it, Keanu. You have to let yourself heal." Her words stayed with him, and slowly he began to open up. He talked about Kim, about their childhood, her strength, her laughter. He let himself cry, and Emma was there every step of the way, holding him through the darkest nights. But life had one more twist in store for them. One morning Emma woke to find herself unable to move, her arms panic set in as she called out for Keanu, her voice trembling with fear. He rushed to her side, his heart sinking as he saw the terror in her eyes. "It's happening faster than I thought," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how much time I have left." Keanu knelt beside her, his hands cupping her face as he said, "Then we'll make every second count. Whatever time we have, Emma, we'll live it together." And so they did, Keanu refusing to let her illness define their lives. Planned small adventures, trips to the beach, quiet pick under the stars, nights spent watching old movies while he held her hand. Even as her body weakened, their love grew stronger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But deep down they both knew the road ahead was uncertain, and though neither of them spoke it aloud, they lived each day with the unspoken understanding that love above all else was what made life worth living. Keanu carried Emma to the garden where her flowers bloomed, frail but radiant. She asked him to promise to keep living after she was gone, though heartbroken he vowed to honor her wish. When Emma passed quietly at dawn, Keanu's World shattered yet guided by her memory, he found solace in small joys, acts of kindness, sunsets, and the flowers she loved. Years later in that same garden he smiled, knowing their love endured forever, alive in his heart.